Good morning, ladies of Woman Come Forth. My name is Tammy Carpenter, and I'm here with your Monday morning motivation. Thank you, Lady K, for this opportunity to speak to us and hopefully provide something to get us through this week. I want to present a thought that we will ponder this week and we will dive into in our lesson this morning. And that thought is reinforcement is for the strong. It is well. I'm going to be reading from 2 Kings 4, starting at verse 8. Now there came a day when Elijah passed over to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman, and she persuaded him to eat food. And so it was, as often as he passed by, he turned them there to eat food. She said to her husband, "Behold now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God passing by us continually. Please let us make a little walled upper chamber, and let us set a bed for him there, and a table and a chair and a lampstand, and it shall be when he comes to us that he can turn in there." One day he came there and turned into the upper chamber and rested. Then he said to Gehazi his servant, "Call this Shunammite." And when he had called her, she stood before him. He said to him, "Say now to her, Behold, you have been careful for us with all this care. What can I do for you? Would you be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the army?" And she answered, "I live among my own people." So he said, "What then is to be done for her?" And Gehazi answered, "Truly she has no son, and her husband is old." He said, "Call her." When he had called her, she stood in the doorway. Then he said, "At this season next year, you will embrace a son." And she said, "No, my lord, O man of God, do not lie to your maidservant." A few things I want to point out in this passage before moving on that we see about this lady is that she made room for what she perceived was a gift from God. Then, when presented with what was it that she needed in return for her kindness, she responded, maybe like many of us do, "Oh, I'm good. I don't need anything. I live among my own people," was what she said. But in her response, when God spoke through Elijah what was going to be happening for her, we see both doubt and desire present in her response. However, what we see about God in this passage is that God sees, God reveals, and God remembers. He sees our actions and our heart. He reveals the intentions and the desires of our hearts. And he remembers those prayers that we've spoken to him, even though we may not be still petitioning him for that because we haven't seen it come to pass yet. The scripture continues on in verse 17 and says, "The woman conceived and bore a son at that season the next year, as Elijah had said to her. When the child was grown, the day came that he went out to his father to the reapers. He said to his father, 'My head, my head.' And he said to his servant, 'Carry him to his mother.' When he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her lap until noon and then died. She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door behind him and went out. When she called to her husband and said, 'Please send me one of the servants and one of the donkeys, that I may run to the man of God and return,' he said, 'Why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath.' And she said, 'It will be well.'" Observations from these passages of scriptures. Her immediate posture was not that of mourning, even though her child had died. She gathered herself and immediately went to get help. So again, our topic or point to ponder for this week is reinforcement is for the strong. It is well. Before we dive a little deeper in that, I want to present a few questions for you to think about as we go a little deeper. Are there barriers to you speaking what you desire? What did God manifest for you in your season of doubt? And have you had moments when it looked dead, and how did you respond? I'll repeat those. Are there barriers to you speaking what you desire? What did God manifest in your season of doubt? And have you had moments when it looked dead, and how did you respond? So going back to our topic or theme for this talk this morning, reinforcement is for the strong. It is well. To look at the word reinforce, it means to strengthen or support, especially with additional material. So there's a word I learned several years ago that I often revisit, especially when I think about reinforcement or something strong needing support. And that word is rebar, Rebar. Rebar, which is short for reinforcing bar, is a steel bar or a mesh of steel wires used as tension device in reinforced concrete to strengthen and aid the concrete under tension. So rebar makes concrete several times more resistant to failure. So in other words, if you've ever been at a construction site or saw a new build subdivision going up and you saw those metal beams that they would put in the ground before pouring the foundation, that is rebar. And the purpose of rebar is because the weight of the structure that is going to be placed upon the concrete, in order for the concrete to withstand the weight, the rebar helps spread the tension and support the tension so that the concrete does not crack. And that to me was amazing when I first learned that, because concrete in and of itself is a strong material. And I would have never thought that concrete, being as strong as it is, would need support to keep from cracking. So when we look at that in relation to who we are and what we do, whether we're business owners, whether we are over ministries, whether we have families that we attend to, whatever number of hats you may wear, if God has you carrying and caring for something great, it is not intended that you carry it alone. So if concrete needs help, support, reinforcement to bear the weight, then of course, so do we. So I like to think about rebar because if you notice, or if you study it, or if you look it up beyond here, you'll notice that it's strategically placed before the concrete is poured, and it's positioned in certain places, the distance that it has to be placed apart, all of that matters. So just like we saw with this Shunammite woman, she thought she was just aiding a man of God passing through the city, but God strategically placed someone along her path to manifest something that she had desired that had lied dormant. And I believe for us that God strategically places people along our path, like the other women that we may be connected to in this group, so that the things in our lives can be manifested, and also so that we can have weight distribution on what we are carrying. So then we see how things turned for this woman of God in this situation, the Shunammite woman. The son that she had stopped praying for, that God saw fit to grant her desire of her heart, grows up, gets ill, and dies. Instead of her going into mourning, instead of her bearing the weight of that, she could have easily gone into the room, closed the door, and began to cry out to God on her own. But no, she laid the child down and then went to seek out for help. So what if God has trusted you with the assignment or the task, whatever it is, not because he's expecting you to solely carry the weight of it, but because he knows you will do what it takes to ensure that it doesn't die? And I'm going to pause and repeat that. What if God has trusted you with the weight of your assignment, or with the assignment itself, not for you to solely bear the weight of it, but because he knows that you will do what it takes that so that you can ensure that it doesn't die. So even in the midst of what looked like a dead situation, we saw that the woman's response to her husband was, "It will be well." And further down in that same passage, as she was getting to Elisha and approaching Gehazi, she said again, "It is well." So even before knowing what the outcome was going to be with her son, while her son was still lying in bed, lifeless, her confession was, "It is well." So declaring it is well, as we often have to do in the face of whatever we're walking through right now, it is not a declaration that we even understand the circumstances that we're navigating, but saying it is well is a declaration of both accepting that we don't know, because we don't fully know God's plan and intention, but we do trust the outcome, whatever God allows. So, as reminders for this week, let's always speak what we desire, because God cares about our desires. Accept the help that He sends, and even seek it out if need be, because reinforcement is needed. And above all else, let's never forget that God sees, God reveals, and God remembers. Reinforcement is for the strong. It is well.